Hi everyone. I want to talk to you today about the assessment objectives because this is probably one of the most crucial pieces of information that you need to know and you need to understand because it's the assessment objectives that examiners use to decide what grade you get. If you can understand how to think like an examiner, then you will automatically be able to get higher marks. Now, these are the literature assessment objectives, and I'm basing this on the AQA exam board. If you are studying with a different exam board, like Edexcel or Educas, then the same assessment objectives will apply. Now, starting off, we're going to look at A01, and in a lot of my videos, I actually color code the assessment objective, and usually I color code this in blue. Now, this is where you need to demonstrate a very deep understanding of the text that you're studying. Now, think about how you can do that. Obviously, one of the ways you can do that is to explain what's happening in, let's say, a particular extract. But another way is to link it to different parts of the actual text. So you want to be able to do that, which the exam question will actually prompt you to do anyway. Now, this is what the actual mark scheme says. It wants you to be thoughtful, and that means that you need to think about your answers and put your own spin on it. But instead of saying, I think, you want to say that the reader might think, or the audience might respond to this in this particular way. So you want to stand out by really thinking about the text, thinking about your interpretation, and as long as you can support it with evidence, then there's no wrong answer. The next thing you want to do is be exploratory, and this will really boost your marks. This is where instead of saying that this line means this, you can explore different possible interpretations. So you could say that maybe the writer meant blah, 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 or maybe he or she meant blah, blah, blah. So you want to try and explore different possible meanings and interpretations, which links to being thoughtful. Now, with references, you need to be precise. What I mean by this is that whenever you make a point, whenever you analyze something, you need to support it with evidence from the text. And usually that comes in the form of a quotation, but the exam board are fine with you also providing examples. So you don't have to remember millions of quotations. But the important bit is that you're precise. Sometimes I see students analyze something and then choose a very strange example that's not perhaps the best one. There's other better examples. So be really precise. And another handy tip is that when you are including a quotation, try and include the smallest, most accurate part. Don't have really lengthy quotations. And this is great news for you because it means it's less for you to have to remember. You also want to be critical. Now, critical is a really advanced essay writing skill, and this is where you challenge interpretation. So you could almost say that, Shakespeare wrote this for an Elizabethan audience who believed in fate. They were very, very superstitious. However, can we blame fate for what's happened to Macbeth or to Romeo and Juliet? Or could we also blame people? And can you see there, I'm saying, okay, commonly we are blaming superstition, but let me be thoughtful about this and let me interrogate that. Let me come up with an alternative theory. Now, sentence starters that you can use to help you be exploratory and be critical and thoughtful, things like this suggests or on the other hand. So instead of saying that this definitely means this, you want to say that this suggests this, or perhaps the writer intended to do whatever. Now, A02 is all about analysing writers' methods and language devices. These are things like personification, alliteration, similes, and also language devices like short sentences or adverbs or the use of a powerful verb or possessive pronouns. So we need to analyse this, and the most important part is to actually talk about its effect. Now, the mark scheme wants you to be very accurate with terminology. So what I often teach students are the subtle differences. So for instance, you probably know what alliteration is. It's when you have the repetition of a certain sound, like the repetition of the H sound when you say high heaven. But there are different types of alliteration. Sibilance is a type of alliteration, but that's where we are repeating the S sound. It creates a hissing sort of sound. Plosives is another type of alliteration, and they're quite harsh sounds. It's when you're repeating things like B and P. So if you understand those very subtle differences, automatically you will be able to get higher grades. Always explain the effect. You will get very few marks if you simply identify alliteration. But if you talk about the effect it has, like the repetition of the H sounds creates a light and airy feel, which links to the playful tone of the poem, immediately you're getting more marks. And use terminology wherever possible. I sometimes see students in their essay saying, the word mingle suggests blah, blah, blah. Now let's think about how we can upgrade that. Instead of saying the word, you can say the verb. Just changing one word means you get more marks. So here are some other sentence starters, some examples. You might say the possessive pronoun suggests, or the controlled structure mirrors, or the alliterative sentence creates. So you want to use this kind of language to explain the effects. Now we have A03, and this is where you need to link your interpretation and the meanings and your analysis to contextual factors. And when we talk about context, we are talking about, who is the writer and what happened in his and her life around the time they wrote this? What's the history? What was happening in society around that time? Maybe what was happening globally around that time? What did people believe in during that time? So these are the sorts of things you need to consider. You need to use appropriate facts. Sometimes I find that just to add a bit of A03, students just throw in some sort of fact. But if it's not really linked to what you're saying, then you're not going to get marks for it. So you need to always link whatever you are saying to the analysis. And I'll show you an example in a minute. And be accurate. Okay, make sure you remember, even if it's just 3 facts about each author, make sure those facts are accurate and they're precise. You don't want to be getting things like that wrong or being slightly inaccurate. So here are some examples. You could say something like, this mirrors how Shakespeare lived most of his life in rural settings. He didn't live in rural settings, I just chucked his name in there. But you want to link it. Can you see how I've linked it to whatever I was analysing using the word mirrors? Here's one that does apply to Shakespeare. Elizabethans believed, so they believed in witches. They were very superstitious. They believed that witches were evil, which is why Shakespeare started Macbeth with witches to create an eerie tone and set the tone for the rest of the play. Can you see how I've really linked what Elizabethans believed in with the opening to the play? As a Victorian writer, let's take Dickens. As a Victorian writer, Dickens wanted to push societal boundaries. He wanted to highlight the differences between the different classes in A Christmas Carol by using Scrooge to represent the higher class and to challenge how the higher classes treat lower classes. So there, once again, I'm linking Victorian society to the actual text. Now, these are your main assessment objectives. For some of the questions, you will also be assessed on your general spelling, punctuation, grammar, quality of writing, and that's called A04, that's assessment objective 4, but it only applies to certain questions, and for those questions, an extra 4 or 5 marks, depending on your exam board. For AQA, it's 4 marks. An extra 4 marks is reserved just for that. Now, finally, I'm going to show you what your essays should look like. It's not an exact science. You're not going to be able to get it really precise, but most of your essays should be taken up with A01 and A02 with just a sprinkle of A03. Here's an example of an essay that I wrote for one of my students so they could see what kind of a grade 9 looked like, and I've colour coded it. Can you see how there's quite a lot of A01? There's a bit of A02, and actually there's probably a bit more A03 than I would have liked, but that's fine because I can rebalance it in a later paragraph where I could add in a bit more AO2. So as long as you've roughly got that balance of it being majority AO1, majority AO2 and a sprinkle of AO3, you'll be absolutely fine. If you have any questions, please do type it in the comments.